1961, Bob Dylan arrived in Greenwich Village in New York City. He had two goals: meet Woody Guthrie and perform in Greenwich Village's vibrant folk scene. Dylan found success quickly, thanks to folk venues like Cafe Wha, The Bitter End, Gerd's Folk City, and Kettle of Fish. And he had musicians like Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie, Peter Paul and Mary, and Richie Havens to thank for this vibrant folk scene. But one artist laid the groundwork for these folk musicians before many of them had even arrived in New York City. Despite finding little success in New York, Connie Converse was one of the first folk musicians to begin assembling a folk enclave in Greenwich Village.
Had a funny old world, that's a coming.
Connie was born in New Hampshire in 1924. She was extremely knowledgeable. She was incredibly active. Their mother would say that she was very happy they would never come to her and ask them what to do, because it seemed as if there was never enough hours in the day for them to do things.
She had a really religious, strict upbringing with her father, who was a Baptist preacher. Her parents were not very hands-on in parenting her or her brother Phil. They were very isolated together, so they were very creative. They made up games, and Connie, she wrote, and it always had like a dark undertone. She was always sad. There was a time in that small town where a younger girl had passed away, and they were talking about how this girl committed suicide. All these people were chitter-chattering around her, and it made her really uncomfortable. And she was really quiet because Phil said that she felt that that was a very private matter. And her brother quoted her to say, "If anything should be left up to a person, it should be whether or not to live." She was super smart. She graduated valedictorian. She set out for college at Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts. This was her first taste of life outside of a religious Baptist home.
She picked up the nickname Connie, and it was around this time she also started to pick up music and songwriting. And a lot of her earliest songs especially were, her own poems that she used to write, then set to music.
In between two tall mountains, there's a place they call lonesome. Don't see why they call it lonesome. I'm never lonesome when I go there.
And I think especially if you look deeply into her music, you can tell that it's mostly, poetically based.
She hated college. She dropped out. She was smoking and drinking, and she just had more fun doing the social stuff than anything in the college. So she moves to New York, and she got a job at the Academy Photo Offset Printing House. But in her free time, she was writing and performing music. Haunting tunes. These are the ones that you hear now when you're listening to Connie's music. And in 1954, the right person finally actually heard Connie.
She was discovered by Gene Deitch, who was, an animator. If like Popeye or Tom and Jerry, he was the animator behind that. They would go to his apartment and they would record songs. And I think they had maybe like 40 or 50 that they ended up getting studio recordings of.
And then after that, she had her first and only television appearance. It was on the CBS morning show with Walter Cronkite. But in 1954, the world was not ready for the singer-songwriter genre.
She wanted to see how commercial she could get with her music, but it didn't really seem to work. I think it's mostly because she was very ahead of her time. I think Connie fits this very specific niche. She was doing something that I think almost nobody else was doing before, and she certainly was at least the only one at the time I think who was recording it. She was taking her poetry and putting it to chords, which really at the time in the 1950s just wasn't a genre. There's one song called "The Witch and the Wizard," which is about a home with a lot of domestic issues.
The witch settled down and the wizard as well, and both began raising the devil in hell in rage and vexation and tears.
And there's a lot of ones about being, a wandering woman.
People say a roving woman is likely not to be better than she ought to be, so when I stray away from where I got to be, someone always takes me home.
stuff that really I don't think socially would have gotten by as well. In terms both stylistically and content-wise, it was, a couple decades even in some places ahead of its time.
In 1961, Bob Dylan moves to Greenwich Village and sweeps up what little audience Connie had amassed. Seeing Bob Dylan's mainstream success, Connie moves back home to Ann Arbor, Michigan, exhausted and resigned. She starts working as a secretary at the University of Michigan and then as the managing editor of the Journal of Conflict Resolution.
And there was a period in the late 60s that she referred to as her Great Blue Funk, a big depression.
In 1972, everything got worse because the job that she had worked at for 10 years had been auctioned off to another university. So she lost her job.
And her friends and family, paid for her to take a trip to Europe for about half a year.
Her mother wanted to take her on another trip. Her brother genuinely believes that because of the way that his mom was like, let's go again, let's go on another trip. That's why Connie left. She had to push off her leaving further because she had to have a hysterectomy. This was like the nail in the coffin because she had always been really fond of children. It was something that she had thought she may at one point have a chance to have for herself.
She waited for Nixon's resignation, and then she sent letters out to her friends and family saying goodbye.
She said, let me go, let me be if I can, let me not be if I can't. To survive it all, I expect I must drift back down through the other half to the 20th, which I already know pretty well, to the 100th. Human society fascinates me and awes me and fills me with grief and joy. I just can't find my place to plug into it. So let me go, please. And please accept my thanks to those happy times that each of you has given me over the years. And please know that I would have preferred to give you more than I ever did or could. I am in everyone's debt.
She hopped into her Volkswagen and hit the road, and nobody's heard from her since.
But that's not the end of Connie's legacy. In 2004, Gene Deitch, by then 80 years old, was invited by David Garland to appear on his radio show, Spinning on Air. Deitch played a scratchy recording of Connie's song, One by One.
And two of Garland's listeners, Dan Zula and David Herman, really loved this music so much that they tracked down the rest of Connie's entire discography. And these two new Connie fans created a music label called Squirrel Things Recordings.
In 2009, after decades of collecting dust, Connie's music was finally released in an album titled How Sad, How Lovely. Now, as the sad singer-songwriter niche grows in popularity, so does Connie's music. Now, Connie's music is streamed by tens of thousands of people every month, and covers of her music are all over the internet. Connie's sad, honest music resonates with those who've been overlooked in a male-dominated music industry.
She doesn't have the legacy that she deserves to have because she's overshadowed by the male singer-songwriters of the same era, even though they wouldn't have had material to work with if it wasn't for Connie's music. They wouldn't have had the Greenwich Village little bars for Bob Dylan to go swoon women with if Connie hadn't been there on the scene putting those tracks in place for the people that would come after her.
People say a roving woman is likely not to be better than she ought to be, so when I stray away from where I've got to be, someone
Now, Connie feels like a contemporary to many female singer-songwriters, joining them in the fight to be heard.
My thing was how sad it is that she didn't get to see how important her legacy was as a musician, but how lovely it was that she got to have her legacy in the end, because it's there now.
Sunset at the end of the street, and the day